Hi everyone, welcome to Pro Wrestling Defined. I'm Jonathan O'Dwyer, and I'm really excited to have the guest that I have on the show today. He is an absolute legend in the world of professional wrestling. He's had major success in all the organizations he's been at throughout his career, whether it be AWA, where he got his start as the Trooper, Global Wrestling Federation, where the Patriot gimmick was born, had a major storyline with the Dark Patriot. WCW, where he was World Tag Team Champions with Marcus Bagwell as part of the Tag Team Stars and Stripes. Had a legendary run in All Japan Pro Wrestling. Was Tag Team Champions there with the Eagle, Jackie Fulton. Wrestled all the top stars there, Masawa, Kenta Kobashi, Stan Hansen, Akiyama, loads of others, the list goes on. And of course, his legendary run in WWE in 1997, part of one of the most significant storylines of the 1990s with Bret Hart and the Hart Foundation, the Canada versus USA storyline. He had an amazing career, and his personal life story is really fascinating. So I think you'll find this interview really interesting, and I can't thank Del enough for being so honest and candid with all of his thoughts. So I'm really excited to present this interview to you. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the Patriot, Del Wilkes. How are you doing today, Del?
Man, I'm doing good. I appreciate you having me on. I know we had to work through a couple of issues to make this happen. I had to cancel a few times, or we just rescheduled. And I appreciate your patience in doing that and working with me, but it's good to finally be with you, man. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, and that's no problem at all. It's an honor to have you on. And first of all, you have your own podcast now at the moment, Unmasking the Truth. You've done a couple of episodes. The feedback so far has been great. How have you been finding that whole process, Del?
I tell you, I've been approached by over the years. I've done hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of podcasts, as most of us have, that have been in the wrestling business. There are so many wrestling podcasts out there, and I've been approached by several people about doing a podcast. But when Avi, my co-host on Unmasking the Truth, approached me about doing it, I thought, yeah, this is the right guy to do it with. And it's gone well for us, very well. It's been very well received. It's just blown me away, some of the numbers we've had as far as the viewers. And it's a podcast where we talk very little about wrestling. I mean, we're open to talking about wrestling. I'm a retired professional wrestler. It's a big part of my life. But I wanted to do something different. I just didn't want to have a podcast dedicated completely to pro wrestling. I wanted to talk about other things that are very near and dear to my heart: current events, political debate, sports, and things like that. So it's gone very well. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, I've really been enjoying it so far, and you'll be touching some pretty heavy subjects tonight. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on all of that now tonight. And anybody that wants to catch that, it's on Del Wilkes' Facebook page and on Twitch every Sunday night at 8 p.m. your time in America, isn't it?
That is correct. 8 p.m. my time.
Yeah, and over here, Ireland or UK, it's 1 o'clock, I'm pretty sure. So, yeah, anybody can catch it on Del Wilkes' Facebook page or on Twitch. So, also, you have a really good documentary. I have my copy of it here. Del Wilkes, the Patriot Behind the Mask. It's an amazing look at your life and career. And anybody that wants to get that, you can get that at delthepatriotwilkes.com, and he'll sign it for you. And there's loads of other good stuff there, merchandise and stuff. So I encourage anybody to go there. One thing in the documentary covers comprehensively is your time as an American football player in college for the Gamecocks. And you transitioned really well into pro wrestling. So just wondering about how difficult was that transition from like the physical mechanics of pro wrestling, because it's a lot harder than what a lot of people might think. So from somebody that was an elite athlete transitioning into pro wrestling, how was that process?
Well, I'm going to agree with you. It was a lot harder than even I thought it would be. I played football all my life, and I played in a position where every down there is physical contact. I was an offensive lineman. Wide receivers can go play after play after play without having really very little physical contact, as can other positions on the field. But offensive and defensive linemen literally engage in hand-to-hand combat every snap. I mean, you're literally trying to physically dominate another human being when you're playing on a football field and you're an offensive lineman. So I thought I could handle anything. I was a big, tough, strong guy. I could handle myself. And then I went to Moolah's camp. I actually thought the NFL was going to be my next step. And I had I was in two camps, one with Tampa Bay and one with the Atlanta Falcons, but it just didn't happen. It just didn't work out for me. So I put it behind me. I started transitioning myself into the world of pro wrestling. And there was, at the time, a school in my hometown of Columbia, South Carolina, that was owned and operated by the Fabulous Moolah, one of the most famous lady wrestlers of all time. Had the WWF belt, as it was called back then, for 28 years. So truly a legendary figure in pro wrestling and in women's pro wrestling. And she had some guys there that were helping run her school that helped train me and the guy that I was breaking into the business with. And I thought this would be easy, man. I mean, I've done two-a-days in football. I've had violent collisions. I mean, anything you can think of on a football field, I've had it happen. But one day after taking bumps or learning how to take bumps, I realized, man, this is a different beast altogether, and it hurt. And it was just using different body parts in different ways. And so it wasn't easy by no means.
Yeah, definitely. I actually went to a wrestling training school here in Ireland back in 2006. Seamus, actually, from WWE, was the trainer at the time. And I was only about 17, I think, at the time. So I was pretty ignorant. Like, I really wanted to become a wrestler, but yeah, I was pretty ignorant to how tough it would be. And when I actually went to the training school and saw it up close and personal, the ring being set up and everything, I kind of thought, I don't think my feeble little body will be up to this. So, so definitely. But so you have your training with Moolah, you go, you move on, AWA, and then one promotion that I'm really curious about is Global. I've been looking up some footage of it recently, and that's where the Patriot was born. Isn't that correct?
It is. I had a couple of stints with the AWA. After I had done my training through Moolah School and worked some shows around here for her and other small independent promoters, I met Wahoo at one of Moolah's shows. He was working for Vern in the AWA, Vern Gagne. And so I went up briefly for a while and worked up there just as Del Wilkes, and really didn't gain any traction. Came back home to South Carolina for a few months and then went back to the AWA, and that's when the Trooper character was born. But that didn't last long because the AWA was literally a dying company. They were flatlining, and what was once a huge, proud territory was literally just hanging on by the slimmest of threads, and they eventually just went belly up and were no longer in existence. So I had heard about this new company that was trying to start up called the Global Wrestling Federation, the GWF, and some of the folks that were going to be running the company contacted me and reached out to me. Bill Eadie, the late Joe Pedicino, Bonnie Blackstone, about their interest in having me come work for the Global Wrestling Federation. Now, it took longer to get their financing behind them than they originally thought. They initially thought that they were going to they were working with a gentleman from Africa that was a very wealthy businessman, and he was going to drop millions upon millions of dollars into this. But that did not happen. It fell through, so they had to find their lending through other sources. But when it came time for the Global Wrestling Federation to do their very first TV taping, which was going to be done at the Sportatorium in Dallas, Texas, I got my plane ticket the way we always got them, through FedEx. It was delivered to my house. So I packed my bags and I packed my Trooper gear, and I flew to Dallas, Texas for the very first Global Wrestling Federation TV taping. Now, all the talent and all the office people stayed at the same hotel there in Dallas. And literally hours before we were to leave to go to the Sportatorium for that first TV taping, Joe Pedicino called me and asked me if I'd walk over to he and Bonnie's room, that they needed to talk with me about something. They had an idea they wanted to run by me. So I walked I walked in and there was Bonnie and Joe and Bill Eadie as well. And back at this time, this is in the very early 90s, United States had gotten involved in liberating Kuwait, where Iraq had gone in and occupied Kuwait. And our military, the first Bush president, George H.W.
Yeah.
Bush, sent the United States military in to liberate Kuwait. And when things like that happen, at least at the beginning, patriotism is always at a very high level here in America, at a fever pitch. And they wanted to take advantage of that high level of patriotism. And they laid out this idea of the Patriot character for me. And Bonnie literally picked up an old, we no longer use paper grocery bags, but those old brown grocery bag, paper grocery bags. And she just unrolled it and she reached in and she pulled out a red, white, and blue mask. She pulled out red, white, and blue tights, red, white, and blue trunks, and said, "We think you're the guy to do this. We think you can be the Patriot and pull this off." And Jonathan, the first night that crowd or any crowd had ever really seen that character was at the Sportatorium that night when I walked down the aisle for my first match, and the place erupted. I mean, they went crazy. And I knew then before I ever stepped into the ring, I said, "We're on to something here. This is a good idea."
Yeah, they definitely picked the right man for the job anyway.
Thank you.
Talk a bit about actually wrestling under the mask, because one thing that sticks out when I watch some of your matches, especially during the WWF run, is you still, even with the mask on and how big you were, you still had a really good ability to get sympathy when the heel would be getting his heat on you. Like you could really create that sense of jeopardy even without having facial expressions being under the mask. Talk a bit about that, the difficulty of selling and some of the restrictions that might come with wrestling under the mask.
Well, it wasn't the first time that I had wrestled under a mask. As a matter of fact, I had already done that several times before. When I first started going to Moolah school, and after she felt like my buddy and I that broke in with me had enough training and we were ready to actually work one of her shows, she put hoods on us and she called us the Mask Grapplers. Very nondescript, just both red mask and very plain looking. So for a while we were the Mask Grapplers. Now I later went to Mid-South and worked for Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler. And upon arriving there, they thought the Dreamweaver would be a good character for me. And so again, I wore a mask for very short, something different with me, and they wanted to team Scott Steiner up. Me and Scott Steiner up together as a tag team. And again, they put a mask on me and they put one on Scott, and we were called the Wrestling Machine. So, and that was a very nondescript, almost a Dick Beyer looking type mask. It's white, just very plain looking. So by the time I got to the GWF, this was my third time around wearing a mask. So I'd gotten somewhat used to it. When you first do it, the first thing you really notice is your peripheral vision is a little bit hindered. In the ring, you've got to have the ability to move side to side, and you've got to have the ability to see where you're going, doing things like that, moving laterally and side to side. So at first that was a little difficult. And then the second thing that was extremely difficult is the first few masks I had, they were very, very thick. It was a very heavy cloth. It was not breathable. It didn't stretch. And there was no air conditioning in the Sportatorium. And when you're in the ring and those ring lights and house lights are right on top of you, and they're just beaming down all that heat from just the lights themselves. And then you couple that with the fact that it's June and July and August in Dallas, Texas, where it's naturally going to be hot as blue blazes. And then you add the fact that there's no air conditioning, and it was hot. I mean, it was unbearably hot at times. But thank goodness I later came in contact with somebody else that started making my mask, and they were thinner, they stretched better, and they actually breathed better, so I wouldn't just get quite as hot. But peripheral vision and heat were the two toughest things to overcome. And you were talking about also, too, the selling.
Yeah.
I had talked with other guys that had worn masks in their careers, and especially Bill Eadie when I was in Global, and Bill was sort of one of the guys that was in charge of talent. And he said, look, man, he said, wrestling is about people being able to see your emotions. Not everybody can sit at ringside. Some folks are going to be at the top of the rafters, and they've got to see through facial expression or through body language you selling. Well, they can't see my face when I've got a mask on. So then just your body language and the use of your arms and the use of your legs and just the way you move and things like that, the way you double over and grab your stomach, those things become so important because that's the only way they can see that I am showing pain or showing anger when I start beating my chest and start firing back up. So body language becomes very, very important, if not one of the most important things for a masked wrestler.
Definitely. And that's something that's so missing from wrestling now, is just those little intricate details and letting things breathe, and just the selling. It just seems everything is so fast, it's hard to actually take anything in now in a lot of the work that's there now.
It is. And I'll agree with you before you go on to the next point. I didn't mean to interrupt, but it is. Okay. You're exactly right. You nailed it. I couldn't have said it any better. It is so fast. Nobody sells anything. It's just a series of big moves after big moves after finish after finish after finish. And these guys bounce right back up and they're just jumping all over the place, man. And it's such a totally different business now, but you're exactly right. That is a lost art.
Definitely. Jake Roberts put it really good at one point. He said it's become all about creating visual excitement rather than emotional excitement. Yeah. And that's what guys from your era were great at, was creating that emotional roller coaster in matches. And I really miss that. There's a few that can still pull it off now, but it's definitely a dying art. But yeah. On staying on GWF for a minute, one angle that I saw there recently when I was looking into it was the angle with the Dark Patriot. I thought that was really interesting. Talk a little bit about your memories of that and who actually was the Dark Patriot.
Well, they felt like I needed a nemesis, and so they came up with the idea of the Dark Patriot. Now, shortly after Global started running, they brought in a guy that had a great mind for the business, Eddie Gilbert. And Eddie was a special talent, had great psychology, a great mind for setting up angles and ideas and matches and things like that. And so we used, it was Eddie's brother, Doug Gilbert, that was my arch nemesis, the Dark Patriot. And Doug had some time under his belt at that time, so he was an easy guy to work with. You know, he had some experience, he knew what he was doing, and he'd actually been around longer than I had. He grew up in a wrestling family. His dad wrestled as well, as long as his brother Eddie, so they come from a wrestling family. But Doug was the Dark Patriot, and it was fun. You know, when we first got there and we were doing these TV tapings on Friday and Saturday nights, many times you'd have to work 2, 3, 4 times in a taping on a Friday night, and you'd go back the next night and work a couple of times again on a Saturday night taping, and all these were put in the can to be shown at a later date. But we were doing that, trying to build the characters that they wanted to push within the company. So immediately they put the North American Heavyweight Championship belt on me. And for a while, I also had the TV belt. I had both belts at one time. But we had gotten to the point where they felt like they had done a good job in establishing me as the top babyface in the country. Now I needed a nemesis. I needed an arch rival. And along comes the Dark Patriot. And I thought it worked very well. I thought it was a good concept, a good idea.
Yeah, I really liked it. And it's ironic because Bruce Pritchard was involved in that angle as well. And I think, yeah, and a couple of years later, then when he was working in WWF, I'm pretty sure he was working there at the time, they did the Undertaker versus Undertaker angle. So I'd say that might be the brainchild of Bruce Pritchard, and where he probably got that from, that GWF angle. But yeah, that was really interesting. So later on, you move on to Japan, and you worked a lot for Giant Baba in All Japan. Talk a little bit about working for Giant Baba. He seems like a very interesting character.
He is, and a great promoter. I think he is one of the greatest promoters that ever lived, without question. And the
Definitely.
first time I went to All Japan, um, there was a guy Japanese guy that lived here in America, and he was a photographer for a couple of the Japanese wrestling magazines, a guy named Jimmy Suzuki, but he would also come to America to scout talent that maybe potentially Mr. Baba would want to book and use. So Jimmy made Mr. Baba aware of me, but this was while I was doing the trooper character. So the first time I went to All Japan, I did so as the trooper. And this was probably 1989 or 90. It's been a long time now, so I'm not quite sure what year it was, but either 89 or 90. And I went to All Japan Jonathan, totally unprepared for what I was about to get into. All Japan was a different style altogether. It was a different way of doing business. That company sold tickets and built up viewership on their TV show simply through the in-ring action. There were no promos, there were no interviews, there were no angles, there were no double countouts. Every match had a clean finish. There were no DQs. You might have a tag team partner, and then one night you're wrestling against your tag team partner. So it was totally a different way of doing business. It was a more physical way of doing business. The matches were longer. The finishes were longer. You could have 25 or 30 false finishes in the course of a finish. And I was totally unprepared for that. And man, that first trip in, I wasn't very impressive. And I remember coming back home and telling my wife at the time, I said, well, I'm done. I'll never go back to Japan. For 3 weeks, I just stumped that joint up, man. I mean, I was awful. I was horrible. But surprisingly, and thank goodness for second chances, I'm doing the Patriot character now. I've gotten a lot more experience under my belt. I've gotten better in the ring, as we all do. The more time we spend in the ring and the more ring time we get, we all progress and get better. And I had gotten better. Obviously, I still needed improvements, but I was way better than I was the first time I went to Japan. And so I got an invitation again to go back to All Japan. And this time I would be doing it as the Patriot. It was just for one tour. It was the May-June tour of 1992. And it was a 3-week tour. I had no idea if I'd ever go back. But 4 nights in to that tour, Baba summoned me. Baba was like, he was like the Don. You didn't just go sit down with Baba. You had to ask permission to meet with Baba, or Baba summoned you. He would send someone for you. And so Baba sent someone to come get me, and I went and talked with him. And he said, I think the 3rd or 4th night into that tour, my first as the Patriot, he said, we want you to work here full time and be a part of this company. And man, I couldn't have been more proud. It was just listen, a lot of people, and I understand them asking me this, and I may be getting ahead of where you're going to go with your questioning. But while I'm on the subject of all Japan, the highlight of my life, I worked 2 different occasions for Baba, probably a total of maybe 4.5 years on 2 different occasions. But the highlight of my career, I meet a lot of wrestling fans, and the first time I've ever met them, they go, man, I know working for Vince had to be the highlight of your career, and Bret Hart, the Angle, had to be the highlight of your career. No, it's a very important part of my career, but the highlight of my career has been and will always be working for All Japan and Baba. Jonathan, we did the best business throughout the 90s on the planet. We sold out everywhere we went, crowded, I mean, just overflow crowds everywhere we went. And when you've got an American lineup of Stan Hansen, Steve Williams, Terry Gordy, Doug Furnace, Danny Crockett, myself, Johnny Ace, the Fantastics on some of the tours, Abdullah Butcher, Dory Funk, occasionally Andre the Giant. And then you go to the Japanese side, and you've got Jumbo Tsuruta, you've got Misawa, you've got Kobashi, you've got Kawada, you got Taue, you got Akiyama. That is Hall of Fame talent on both sides. And the matches that I got to witness and be a part of every night were phenomenal and some of the best in the world. So I challenge anybody to give me a better decade of pro wrestling than All Japan throughout the 90s. It can't be done.
Definitely. It really was an all-star cast there for sure. One name that you brought up there, I'm just curious. I couldn't find if you'd actually worked with him or not. Did you work at all with Stan Hansen?
Oh yeah, I worked with Stan as my tag team partner. I've had single matches galore with Stan. I've been in tag matches where he was in the opposing tag team. So I've probably worked with as my tag team partner or against Stan hundreds of times. So and I had a good seat on the American bus. There were All Japan had 3 buses. Mr. Baba had his own bus. And should have. He was the boss. He was the don. And then there was a bus for the Japanese guys, and then us American guys had our own bus. And Stan sat right in front of me, and I was right behind him. So we had hours and hours of fun, in-depth conversations of other things beside wrestling. But yeah, I've worked with Stan hundreds of times.
What was it like being on the receiving end of the lariat from him?
Well, I try to do my homework. I try to notice what goes on. And I noticed that if you let Stan extend his arm, that he would take your head off. But what I did is I decided I was going to crowd Stan's body, where I would be taking more of a shoulder tackle than a clothesline. I watched from others, man. I'm not going to get too far away from that body, because if I do, that clothesline is going to come right across the bridge of my nose. And I don't want that to happen. So I would just get as close to his shoulder and his armpit as I could. That way he's swinging that arm, but I'm taking more of a shoulder tackle.
Smart. Nicely done. Yeah, that's really good. So later on, you get your opportunity you go through WCW first. You have the tag team with Buff Bagwell. You were part of 2 successful tag teams, actually, the Eagle in All Japan as well. Talk a bit about actually the different dynamics between working as a singles or as a tag team competitor that people might take for granted, the differences in psychology and that kind of thing.
Well, single matches are great, and I I started my career out wanting to be a singles wrestler, and I did on a large part of my career. But there was also a part of my career where I was involved in tag teams. Now, the fun of that is all the action that can go on. Single matches can be action packed as well, but when you add the 4 guys in the ring, and actually the 5th with the referee, so you've got 2 guys in each corner and a referee. Man, there's a lot of things you can do. There's a lot of excitement you can create, a lot of the double moves and the close 1, 2, 3, and then your tag team partner comes sliding in and makes a save, or vice versa. One of the most popular tours, I'm not going to say one of, I would say the most, when working for Baba. Baba ran 8 tours a year. He ran 28 weeks a year, and they were either 3 or 4 week tours, but he only ran 28 weeks a year. And the November-December tour was the tag tour, where at the end of that tournament, the tag team champions would be crowned, and it was the most popular tour. So there's a lot you can do in tag team wrestling that you just can't do in singles wrestling. And you add that element of 5 people in the ring now rather than 3, and it just gives you a lot more things you can do, and a lot more spots and things like that. So I always enjoyed tag team wrestling. It was a lot of fun. And as you were talking about a while ago, when I got to WCW, I went in as a singles wrestler. And back then they were booking by committee, Jonathan. It was Flair, Arn Anderson, Kevin Sullivan, Greg Gagne, whom I'd had a good relationship with since my days in the AWA. And it was a committee of guys. I think even Dusty may have been on that committee. Mm-hmm. But they decided that they would like to see Bagwell and I in a tag team. So Greg Gagne, Mike Graham was another one on the tag team, on the booking committee. Greg and Mike Graham came to me and said, look, we're thinking about putting you and Marcus together, Marcus Bagwell. And they just laid out the plan to me, the Stars and Stripes theme. And I liked it. I've known Marcus since our days in Global when he was working as a handsome stranger. He was a guy that loved the business, that still does. He was a guy, or is a guy, that's dedicated to his craft. He worked hard in the ring. He worked hard out of the ring to make sure he looked good took good care of himself. So I was more than excited to have a tag team with Marcus, and we were tag team champs twice there. The Nasty Boys, Harlem Heat, Pretty Wonderful, which was Paul Roma and Paul Orndorff, and then Stars and Stripes. And then you had Bunkhouse Buck and Dick Slater. So there was a long list of good tag teams there. And it was back when tag team wrestling still meant something. And so I enjoyed my time working with Marcus. And he still, to this day, remains one of my closest friends. He's a good dude.
That's awesome. So you move on to WWF and talk a little bit about...
Actually, before the WWF, I went back to Japan again for a couple of years before. So that was my second stint with Bob. I told you I'd been there twice. So I left WCW, and I'll give you a little story on that if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I was in WCW when they scored the big coup, when they signed Hulk Hogan away from the WWF, as it was still known. Mm-hmm. So they brought in Hogan, and Duggan was there, and they brought in Savage. So they sort of raided Vince's roster and brought in a lot of guys into WCW at the time, and it was a big deal. And shortly after, the whole company became about Hulk Hogan and Hulk Hogan's friends. Now, I realize he's Hulk Hogan, and he should be the center of just about everything you're doing. I get that. But you've got to have a complete card, and you've got to have a lot of other guys that support that. You can't just run a company on one or two guys. And after he got there, the focus strictly became on Hulk and his friends. And seemed like the rest of us were sort of put on the back burner we were on the road, we were working, but there was just really no plan. They really weren't doing anything with us. So I went to Bischoff. I had signed a 3-year contract with them. And I knew Eric from my days in the AWA. He was our TV guy when I worked for Vern in the AWA. So I'd known Eric a long time, and Eric was probably, along with Greg Gagne, the main reason I went to WCW and my friendship with those guys. But about halfway through my 3 years there, I went to Eric and I said, dude, I've got a chance to go back to All Japan. I said, the people in America, they won't even see me on TV. You know, you got people here that buy tapes, they can see me on tapes. But other than that, no one in America is going to know what I'm doing. I'm going to be on the other side of the world back in Japan. You're simply not doing anything with any of these tag teams. This whole company now evolves around Hulk Hogan, and you've got no ideas for the rest of us. So I would like to get out of the last year and a half of my contract. I'm unhappy here. I don't want to be here. I'm ready to go back to Japan. And he said, no, I'm not going to let you out. Well, I walked out of that office knowing it didn't matter if he was going to let me out. I was gone. And just a few weeks later, I was supposed to be at a pay-per-view in Tupelo, Mississippi. And the only person that I gave forewarning to, and I owed it to him because he's one of my great friends, and he was my tag team partner, was Marcus. And I told him, I said, bud, I'm not going to be in Tupelo Sunday night. I'll be on a plane back to Tokyo, Japan. I'm walking out. They won't let me out of my contract. I'm just walking away. They can do what they want to do. They can try to sue me. I don't care, but I'm not hanging around. And so I went back to All Japan, and I did get a lot of threats of lawsuits and a lot of letters, and I just ignored that. I never responded to any of it, and they finally just left me alone. So I went back to Japan, and then the next stop was the WWF.
Sure. And so talk a bit about your first meetings with Vince. What was the dynamic like with Vince when you met up? Because we always hear that he's not really a fan of masked wrestlers, but he still went with the Patriot gimmick. So how did you get along with Vince?
Well, I had gone up and worked for Vince up in the early 90s, maybe 91, 92. I went out on the road for a while. Rick Martel was hurt. They needed somebody to fill a spot. So I'd already, known Vince and been around Vince and worked for Vince back then. So Jim Ross, who I was friends with and knew very well, and Bruce Pritchard, who you mentioned before. And Bruce had gone to Vince and said, look, man, we ought to bring Dale in. And I think we could do a lot with him. He's shown that he's worked all over the world and he's had success wherever he's been. So Bruce called me and said, look, man, Vince wants to talk to you. They FedExed me the ticket and I flew up and had a long talk with Vince. And you're exactly right. He wasn't that thrilled about the idea of a masked man. He just felt like that point in time in the wrestling industry, in the climate of the wrestling industry, that people just would not buy into a masked man. And I said, well, Vince, I said, I totally disagree with you. I said, look at the success I had in WCW, you know, two-time tag team champs there. I said, look at the success I had in Global. And I said, even more, look at the success I had in All Japan. I said, so this is a very popular, well-known character worldwide. And I think I could have the same success here. And he sort of begrudgingly agreed with me to let me do what I wanted to do. I was one of the few guys that, and you think about this, one of the few guys that ever went to work for Vince that came in with his own gimmick that Vince did not create. Vince usually likes to create the character and create the gimmick, and then that way he owns it as well. But he did not create that. I went in with my own character. I kept that character. And obviously, it didn't take Vince long to realize the response I was getting at TV, the response I was getting on the road, that it was a character that the people could latch on to, had an emotional investment in, and a character that was over with the people, because it wasn't but a few short weeks later that he came to me about the idea of doing the Bret Hart angle, the America versus Canada angle. So I think he saw that it was still a worthwhile character.
Definitely. And you come to the angle with Bret, and like, for anybody that hasn't seen it, I'd strongly recommend watching the match with the Patriot and Bret Hart at Ground Zero. For me, I think it's one of the, at least for what I love out of wrestling, it's definitely in the top 10 of displaying what proper pro wrestling I think should be. There was such a really good heel babyface, good versus evil dynamic, with great actual technical work then as well. So just talk a little bit about the memories of working with Bret at the time.
Well, it was a pleasure working with Bret. Bret's a pro's pro. We know the background of the family and how he came up, and the influence that the Hart family has had throughout pro wrestling for decades and decades. And one thing I always liked, it's I took my job very seriously. I didn't get in the ring to make people laugh. I didn't want to do funny spots. I didn't want to do comedy spots. I wanted people to look at this as a believable athletic contest. Mm-hmm. And that just fit right in with the way Bret felt and the way Bret did business. And I felt like our styles really meshed well together. And honestly, I thought it was just an extension of what I've been doing in All Japan for all those years. It was a rather snug style, which I'm fine with. I don't mind snugness in the ring. I like it. I think it makes it look better. It makes the product look better, more believable. And Bret, was cut out of the same cloth. And so it was just a natural fit. And then just the storyline itself was just natural. I mean, here's the face of the company that all of a sudden this Canadian that was really liked by the WWF fan base has now turned on America, and he's trashing America, and he's calling Americans awful names and saying bad things about this country. And then walks a guy that is literally draped in the flag called the Patriot, and he's standing up for the American way. He's ready to take on that evil Canadian, who, as a matter of fact, that evil Canadian has to leave his own country to come to America to make his living, but yet he's bad-mouthing this country and putting the boots to this country. So just everything about the angle and the program fit, and it worked well. And I enjoyed it. We had a lot of fun doing it together.
Yeah, it was amazing stuff. It really was. So another guy you worked with in WWE at the time in tag matches here or there is the Undertaker. Any particular memories of working with Undertaker, and were you ever privy to one of the wrestler courts behind the scenes?
No, I never was. To the Undertaker part. Now, I'd known Mark earlier in the discussion. I told you about going to Mid-South and working for Lawler and Jarrett there. Mm-hmm. And Scott Steiner and I being the wrestling machines, and I started out as a Dreamweaver. Well, when I got to Mid-South, Scott Steiner was there. Tracy Smothers was there. A guy named Brian Lee was there. Sid was on his way out, Sid Vicious, and then Mark
Yeah.
was there as well. So there was a lot of good young talent that would go on to have great careers that were there in Mid-South. So that's when I first met Mark. And I forget the name of the character he was doing, but it was like a guy that had escaped the psych ward, and he was crazy and out of his mind, and he had the real short shaved head. And now years down the road, I'm back working with him again as the Undertaker. But no, I was never a part of any of that. Um, I just sort of I was a guy that sort of stayed to myself. I was there to do a job, and when I did my job, I was back out on the road most of the time. Now I did when I at the end of my run in the WWF, I traveled with Rock and D'Lo Brown, and we would all stay at the same hotel, eat together, train together. But prior to those guys, I just was on my own. I did my own thing. I sort of wanted to get away from the boys, away from the building. So I did that for the first part of my time in WWF. Then there at the end, I started rooming and running and driving with Rock and D'Lo.
Sure. And one thing, the timing of your WWE run is kind of paradoxical in the sense that it couldn't have come at a more perfect time for your character because of the Canadian Canada versus USA angle. So it was perfect for your character, but then for you personally, it kind of came at a bad time with injuries and the tribulations that you went through from that. Talk about the way things went after WWF, the tribulations you had with addiction, and ultimately your redemption in Christ, and what role faith plays in your life now today.
Well, I was never injured in a WWF ring, not one time. My injuries were well before I got to WWF. As much as I loved working for All Japan, and I still do consider it the highlight of my career, in one way, it was very bad for my career, and that was the physicality of it. The matches there were very, very physical. And I probably did things a guy 280 pounds shouldn't have been doing, flying off that top turnbuckle every night, doing drop kicks off the top turnbuckle. I remember Stan Hansen pulled me aside one night, and he said, all that stuff looks good for a big man. He said, but you're going to cut some time off your career if you keep doing that. He said, you need a finish where you don't have to leave your feet. And he said, you need moves where you don't have to jump off the top turnbuckle. And I thought, yeah, right, Stan, whatever. You can't do it. That's the only reason you're telling me that. But he was right. He was exactly right. And so I had a major, major knee injury. That knee has since been replaced 3 times, which I've had 4 operations on. So I was damaged goods when I got to the WWF. And I wanted so bad to work there and sort of wind my career down there that when I received the physical. Now, they do things different now because of probably things like this. But back then, they mailed me my contract. I had my attorney overlook it, and then I signed it. And then they mailed me the form that I could take to any doctor and have a physical. Now, their doctors do physicals now. But I had a buddy of mine that was a doctor in Indianapolis, and he was one of the doctors that would write scripts for all the boys. And I mailed him that physical, and he filled it out for me. He never saw me. I never visited his office for that. He never saw me. He gave me a clean bill of health. So I literally covered up my injuries and basically was untruthful with Vince and those guys about how bad I was injured when I got there. And I knew when I got there that I was on borrowed time. I had no clue how long I could last. I didn't think it would be long, and it wasn't long. Those injuries finally caught up to me, and I just could not continue to go. The one thing that I had counted on my whole life at that point to get me a scholarship to college, to get me an opportunity to play college football, to allow me to become a first-team All-American football player, get tryouts in the NFL and become a pro wrestler, my body. My body allowed me to do all that, but now my body was failing me, and the end was in sight. Now, along the way with these injuries, in the business that I was in the world of pro wrestling, the last thing you want to do is take time off the road to heal or have surgery. because out of sight, out of mind. This business keeps moving on without you. And if you take a year off to heal, to get better, to have a surgery and rehab, you could come back and lose all the momentum you had. And I didn't want to do that, and neither did other guys. So I was on the road one day. I had had surgeries before in college, but I really don't recall taking pain meds. I'm sure I was prescribed it after surgery, and I'm sure I took them, but that was about the extent of it. But I'm on the road one night, and I'm complaining of an elbow that is swollen up like a tennis ball. And I'm with John Nord. He's driving. I'm sitting in the back seat, and Kurt Hennig is sitting in the passenger seat up front, directly in front of me. And I was just complaining about how bad I was hurting. And Kurt said, "Well, what do you take for pain?" And I said, "Well, I take goody powders, which are a very known thing, very well known thing here in the States. It's just basically acetaminophen in powder form, and you can wash it down your throat real quick and it takes effect real quick." And Kurt turned around and he looked at me and he laughed at me. He said, "You take goody powders?" He said, "Dude," he said, "you need to get your doctor to write you a prescription for Percocet." And I said, "What's a Percocet?" He said, "You got to be kidding me, man." He said, "How have you made it in this business with not having Percocets?" He said, "Here," and he handed me 4 of them. He said, "Take one before the match tonight, one before you go to bed, one vice versa. I mean, do the same thing tomorrow." And innocently, just to try to get through a match without pain and to continue to do what I was getting paid good money to do, I took those Percocets. And it took a few years, but those 4 he gave me eventually worked themselves into 120 a day. I had developed a horrible addiction. And I had to take 15 to 20 at a time. I would always chew them up, get them into powder form, and then wash them down with water, Gatorade, whatever it was. But I had worked my way up to 120 pain tablets a day. Now, I was also still using the sleeping pills, the Halcyons, the Valium, the Xanax, the Somas. So when you count all those other medications in, along with the pain pills, I was taking over 200 pills a day. And at this point, the doctors had started cutting me off, Jonathan. They would no longer write me prescriptions. They knew that I had a problem. And I got a doctor that I'd never been to before. I went to him and was able to sort of trick him into writing me a prescription for pain pills. And what I did was I made a copy of that prescription that he had written for me because it's got vital information on it. It's got a doctor's DEA number. In the United States, a doctor's DEA number is the equivalent of his Social Security number. It's the number that identifies him as a doctor, and it also has his license number on it. Now, that same doctor that was prescribing all the pills for the boys and that rigged up the physical for me, I'd been around him enough in his office, and I'd heard him call prescriptions in for other boys. I'd be sitting in his office when guys would call boys I knew wanting prescriptions, and he'd call them in. So I learned what to say, and I learned how to say it, and I learned the lingo and the language and what needed to be said. So one day I got the nerve up to call a prescription in. I pretended to be the doctor, and it worked. I did it again the next day, and it worked. I did it again, and it worked. And it started working. And so I was calling in my own prescriptions. And that is a felony in the United States. That's a felony in the state of South Carolina where I live. So after getting by with it many times, then I started getting caught. And I was arrested 28 times for prescription forgery. And I guess because of my name recognition in the state, from what I did, my days at Carolina, playing football there, being an All-American, and also the name recognition, being a worldwide known professional wrestler. The criminal justice system took it easy on me. They would find me, and it would happen again. They would find me, it would happen again. So they decided to put me on probation, and I kept doing it. So then they put me on intensified probation, and I kept doing it. Then they put me on double secret intensified, probation, and nothing would stop me. I was a full-blown junkie. And eventually all that caught up to me. And when you're living a life like that, it has a ripple effect on everything around you. It affected my family, which I lost. My wife divorced me. It affected my finances, and eventually it affected my freedom. I had gone before a judge one time who put me on probation, and then had, on two other occasions, intensified that probation. And this last time I went before him, he said, "Mr. Wilkes, you've given me no choice." He said, "But I'm going to have to literally send you to prison." He said, "I sentence you to 5 years in the South Carolina Departments of Correction." And he said, "I'll suspend it to 18 months. And so I did almost a year in the prison system here in the state of South Carolina. And it took that for me to get sober, clear-headed, and realize what a huge mistake I'd made, and what a fool I'd been, and how all this had just such in a negative way affected my life. I grew up in a good Christian home. I was raised in church, and it was there that I leaned on my faith to help me get out of this, because I had made a big mess, man, a big mess, and I'd done it all on my own. But I was incapable of cleaning that mess up. I couldn't do that on my own. And I just relied on the Lord and his strength and his goodness and his graciousness and his mercy and his forgiveness. And I got out of prison in February, about Valentine's Day of '03. And things have been good since.
That's great. It's great to hear that you're doing well. And you're a real life patriot as well. You that really shines through in the podcast that you do. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. Well, what do you think of the state of the country at the moment, and how do you think things are going to play out in November?
Well, things are tough right now in America. I'm old enough to remember the '60s and the late '60s, which was a very turbulent time in this country. 1968, when Martin Luther King was murdered, when Bobby Kennedy was murdered, civil rights, women's rights were a big issue. Anti-Vietnam War was going on, and it was a very, very turbulent time in this country, and it was a bad time. And we're going through a lot of that again right now. A lot of this reminds me of 1968, the late '60s. And bad enough that we're dealing with this pandemic that's going on, but it's being used as a political tool. Also, too, we've got this this culture that wants to defund the police and wants to do away with any form of law and order in this country, and that's dangerous and that's scary. So we're going through some scary stuff in this country, some scary, scary stuff. The council culture that we have to deal with. It used to be that we could politely disagree on politics in this country. You can no longer do that. If you don't agree with the angry mob, if you don't agree with the far left wackos, then their ultimate goal is to eliminate you, to completely eliminate you. If it means doing away with your job, if it means silencing you where you can never speak again, or have a way or a platform to voice your political beliefs, they're all for it. And that's a scary thing too. And I know I was listening before you and I started this a while back. Just right before we got on with each other, I was listening to the news and all these polls telling me that Joe Biden has got this big lead, and I can't help it. I don't buy it. And here's why I don't buy it, Jonathan.
Look what happened last time.
That's exactly right. Look what happened last time when we were being told the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. And you know as well as I do, and you may be experiencing it where you live, but here in America, there truly is a silent majority of people that are afraid to be vocal about their conservative beliefs. I'm not, but many are, because they're afraid of that retribution. Sometimes it's physical. I mean, we've seen people in this country get beat up for wearing a MAGA cap or wearing a shirt supporting our president. So a lot of the people, I think, are honestly afraid. They feel like I do, but they're not going to respond on a poll or anything like that. And I just don't see the American people knowing that if you give a vote to Joe Biden, you're endorsing all this garbage that's going on, burning our streets, attacking our federal buildings, attacking our police, firebombing our police departments, we had 3 police officers in Seattle blinded by these rays that were shot in their eyes. And I firmly believe a vote for Joe Biden is an endorsement for all that chaos, all that lawlessness, and all that garbage. And I just can't see the American people wanting that. And I don't think they will. And I may be wrong, but I still think President Trump will win re-election, and we need him to win re-election.
Definitely. They may be silent on the polls, but as long as they're not silent come voting day, that's
Absolutely.
the main thing.
That's exactly right. And I don't think they will be. I think they realize sitting at home and not voting increases the likelihood of that far left group of wackos taking office. And we know good and well that Joe Biden is not capable of running this country, but he will cater to those that will pull him as far left as they possibly can. And they will be the ones that will shape his agenda and shape his presidency if he is elected president. And I just don't see the majority of Americans wanting that to happen. So I think they'll show up in big numbers on election day, and I pray they do.
And last question. We touched on it a little bit in your podcast. Like anybody that's watching can interact in the comments of your podcast on Facebook. And one of the things I mentioned was it's ironic, the angle you did with Bret in '97, the way Bret was hated in the US but cheered like a god in Canada. I think it's at a place in America now that if the Patriot gimmick was in the professional wrestling world today, there would probably be that paradoxical dynamic there where, in some states that would be more left-leaning, you would probably get riots. And, then in other states, then it would be over the top with patriotism. So talk a little bit about that. How do you think it would go down in today's professional wrestling industry?
I totally agree with you based on today's political climate. And we have also seen the expressions of many of those that work for Vince and work in the WWE, what they believe politically. And it seems that most of them are left-leaning. They've got that right. We have that right as Americans to support whoever we want to. But I do believe that the Patriot character today, depending on what part of the country he was wrestling in, could definitely be seen as one that's not very popular. Now, I'm fortunate. I've lived in the southern part of the United States of America all my life. It's the most conservative area of this country, and I am so proud of that. Man, I'm proud to be a Southerner. I am proud to be from Dixie, and I'm in one of the most conservative states in the South, being in South Carolina. And I live in the Midlands of South Carolina, which is the most conservative area of a very conservative state. So I've got a feeling if I were in southern states, I would be just fine and get the same reaction that I got in 1997. But if I went to other states, yeah, I would be getting the reaction that Bret Hart was getting in the United States back then. So yeah, it probably wouldn't be a very favorable character in New York or on the West Coast or in Colorado, Utah, New Jersey, Michigan, places like that.
Sure. Well, thanks so much, Del, for joining me on this. This has been amazing. It's been an honor to talk to you. And anybody that wants to check out his podcast again every Sunday night, 8 p.m. American time, UK 1 a.m. thereabouts, and Unmasking the Truth on Del Wilkes' Facebook page or on Twitch. No topic is off limits. And go to delthepatriotwilkes.com for if you want to buy the documentary. Del will sign it for you. There's loads of other merchandise if you want signed 8x10s or t-shirts or anything. Go to the website. And thanks again, Del. This was brilliant.
Thank you, man. And also want to let the people know and remind them that if you're not able to catch the podcast live, they can still go to my personal Facebook page and watch it again. So if you miss it live, you'll still have all the chances you want to watch it by just going to my personal Facebook page. And man, it was good to finally get to do this, finally get to talk to you. I appreciate your patience in dealing with me, and thanks for having me on, man. I greatly appreciate it. And
Thank
thank
you,
you for
Del.
your support by, watching the podcast and some things you've purchased off the website. So I thank you for that as well.
Thanks so much, Del. Thanks. It's been an honor talking to you. Take care.
Thank you, man. Have a good one.